The day I met my father's other daughter, I realized I'd never really known him at all. That was the thought echoing in my head as I sat across from a stranger who shared my father's eyes. She had the same sharp nose, the same way of folding her hands when she felt nervous, and yet she was no one I'd ever seen before. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. The air was thick, like it carried secrets that had been waiting too long to be spoken. The ticking of a clock filled the silence between us. "Ms. Parker," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "This is Miss Alvarez. She's your father's daughter as well." My throat went dry. My heart stumbled over itself. I'd come here expecting closure. My father's death had already taken too much out of me. Months of hospitals, sleepless nights, the slow unraveling of a man I'd once thought invincible. But this was a second death, a death of the version of him I thought I knew. The woman, no, my half-sister, offered a small, trembling smile. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Elena." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I remember gripping my purse until my knuckles turned white, trying to keep from shaking. The sound of rain against the window blurred with the lawyer's words. Joint inheritance. Will revision. Equal distribution. But I wasn't hearing him. I was hearing my father's voice. Years ago saying, "You're my only girl. Liz, everything I have is for you." He had lied. Before that day, life was simple, not perfect, but predictable in the way comfort sometimes dulls you. I was 31, living in a small townhouse in Seattle. I worked as a junior architect for a design firm that specialized in residential projects, homes that always looked warmer than they felt. I had no siblings, no spouse, just a quiet rhythm, work, coffee, phone call to Dad on Sundays, and the occasional dinner with my mother, who'd long divorced him but still spoke his name like a bruise she couldn't stop pressing. My father had been an engineer, the practical kind, the kind who fixed broken hinges before they squeaked, who checked oil levels before road trips, who wrote grocery lists in block letters like blueprints for survival. He was distant, yes, but steady. The kind of man who believed that love was proven through action, not words. Every birthday card he ever gave me had a small envelope of cash inside. Never gifts, never hugs, but always his quiet way of saying, "I see you." When he passed away after a sudden heart attack, I was the one who arranged everything. My mother refused to come to the funeral. "Old wounds," she said, so it was just me, a handful of his co-workers, and the smell of lilies I'd bought because he once mentioned he liked white flowers. I remember standing by his casket thinking, it's over. The story's done, but I was wrong. His story had another chapter, one he'd hidden halfway across the world. It started small, like most truths do. A month after the funeral, I was cleaning out his home. He'd lived alone in a 2-bedroom house near Vancouver. I went through boxes of receipts, old tax papers, and tools that probably hadn't been touched in years. It felt sacred at first, touching his things. The worn-out gloves on the garage table, the faint smell of sawdust mixed with aftershave. Then I found a drawer I'd never seen before. It was in his study, beneath a stack of outdated manuals, locked. My father wasn't a man of secrets, or so I thought. He labeled everything, even his toolboxes. So a locked drawer felt strange, out of character. I almost let it go, but curiosity has a way of disguising itself as duty. I told myself I needed it for estate paperwork. It took me 30 minutes and a flathead screwdriver to pry it open. Inside was a folder. Old photographs, a few letters, and a bank statement from a branch in Manila. The photos were what made me sit down. My father was in them, smiling wider than I'd ever seen him smile. His arm was around a woman I didn't recognize, dark hair, gentle eyes, and between them, a child, a girl of maybe 6 or 7. In one photo, she was sitting on his lap, showing him something she'd drawn. The joy on his face was foreign. I remember whispering out loud, "Who are you?" The next photo had a date printed in the corner, June 2002. I was 8 years old then. The same year my parents separated. Something inside me clicked, a cold, clean sound like glass cracking. Over the next week, I tried to pretend I hadn't seen it. I went to work, smiled at meetings, cooked the same meals. But my mind was a constant reel of that little girl's face. I kept hearing my father's voice telling me stories about his business trips, about how he'd be gone just a few weeks, about how work was busy overseas. It wasn't work. It was her. And then the lawyer called. Apparently, my father's will had been updated a year before his death. He'd named both daughters as beneficiaries. That was how I met Elena. She lived in Toronto now, but had grown up in the Philippines with her mother. Her accent was light but noticeable, and she carried herself like someone used to, apologizing before speaking. I remember thinking, she's not to blame for this. But my heart wanted someone to blame. I barely listened as the lawyer explained terms. Your father had assets split between 2 accounts. Both daughters are entitled to equal shares. Equal? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I took care of him. I buried him. I handled everything. And you're telling me some stranger gets half? Elena flinched but didn't argue. She just whispered, I didn't even know he had another daughter until he died. For a moment, we sat there, 2 sides of a secret neither of us created, both holding pieces of a man who'd loved us separately, never together. When I left that office, it was raining again. Seattle rain, soft and relentless. I walked home without an umbrella, trying to wash the ache out of my chest. But it stayed. It stayed for months. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in my house felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock. I kept replaying his words from years ago. You're my only girl. You're my legacy. Had he said that to her too? I pulled out the photos again, looked at her face. She had my eyes, my father's smile, and for the first time I realized she must have grown up wondering where he was too. Wondering why he came and went. Maybe crying when he left for work. Maybe we were both the abandoned ones. Still, when the estate lawyer sent me the paperwork the next week, I didn't hesitate. I filed a claim contesting the will. It wasn't about greed. It was about truth, about what I deserved. At least that's what I told myself then. The first hearing took place on a cloudy Tuesday morning in a courthouse that smelled faintly of paper and cold coffee. It was supposed to be procedural, just an opening statement from both sides, nothing personal. But how do you separate the law from the heart when family is the case? Elena sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, quiet as the room filled with the sound of shuffling papers. Her lawyer spoke with a calm professionalism that grated against the storm in my chest. My client only seeks recognition of her rightful inheritance, he said, his voice almost too gentle. Mr. Parker supported her education, maintained financial accounts in her name, and expressed intent to provide for both daughters. Both daughters. The phrase stung like salt on a fresh wound. When my lawyer stood up, I expected him to echo my rage. But instead he said, my client, Elizabeth Parker, is merely asking for clarity. The deceased's prior will, which lists only her, was never formally revoked. There's a discrepancy in filing dates. The judge nodded slowly. So you're contesting the newer version's validity? Yes, Your Honor. The whole thing felt mechanical. Signatures, witnesses, legal jargon, but I wasn't thinking about law. I was thinking about that smile in the photograph. The one he'd never given me. When the session adjourned, Elena approached me near the corridor. Liz? She said softly. Can we talk? I hesitated. The part of me that was raised to be polite said yes. But the wounded part, the one that had cried alone in that empty house, wanted to run. Still, I nodded. We walked to a nearby cafe, the kind with quiet jazz playing in the background and baristas who spoke in soft tones. She sat across from me, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I looked at her, really looked. She couldn't have been more than 26. There was a sincerity in her eyes I didn't know how to handle. "Did you know about me?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not until after he died. My mom told me. She said he had another family here." I didn't believe her at first. "Family," I repeated. "That's generous. He left us too, you know." "He left my mom when I was 8, her lips pressed into a line. He left mine when I was 9. We sat in silence, two timelines intersecting like broken glass. When I left, I didn't feel better. I felt heavier, as if the truth had weight and I'd just agreed to carry it. Over the next few weeks, I dove into paperwork, emails, statements, records, anything that might give me ground to stand on. I told myself it was about fairness, about doing what was right. But deep down, I knew I wanted to punish him. He wasn't alive to face me, so his money became the battleground. At night, I'd find myself staring at the old photos again. The one where I was blowing candles on my 10th birthday. The one where he stood behind me, smiling faintly, a hand on my shoulder. I used to think that hand meant protection. Now it felt like possession. And then one night, I found something else. A letter. It was tucked inside one of his engineering notebooks, yellowed, folded neatly. The handwriting was his, the ink slightly faded. "Dear Liz, if you ever find this, it means I didn't get to explain things the way I should have. There are things I'm not proud of, choices I made that were selfish, even cowardly. I loved your mother once, but we both changed. And somewhere along the way, I found someone else who made me feel young again. That doesn't excuse what I did, but I hope you'll believe that I never stopped loving you. You'll probably hate me when you find out, and you'll have every right to. But I want you to know, I tried to do right by both of you. Maybe not equally, maybe not perfectly. But I tried. Love, Dad." My hands shook as I read it. Tears blurred the last lines. It was everything and nothing at once. An apology without redemption, a confession too late to matter. For the first time, anger wasn't enough. It melted into something harder to define: grief, betrayal, confusion. I put the letter back and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the rain and wondering how many versions of him existed. The next hearing was worse. Elena's. Lawyer presented proof of monthly transfers, small but consistent, from my father's account to hers. Tuition payments, hospital bills, even birthday remittances. I sat there, my chest tightening with each document they showed. It was undeniable. He had provided for her, but what about me? I thought of the Christmases he missed, the school recitals he promised to attend and never did. How many times did he call to say he was busy overseas while he was actually tucking her in? I looked at Elena again. She was crying quietly, her mother sitting behind her, holding a tissue. And for a flicker of a moment, I pitied her. Not because she was my rival, but because she had also lived half a life, one built on borrowed time. When the hearing ended, my lawyer leaned close and said, "You have a chance to settle. Liz, 50-50 isn't worth the emotional toll." But I shook my head. I need to see this through. I didn't even know what through meant anymore. I just knew I couldn't walk away yet. A week later, my mother called. She'd heard about the court case. Small towns have quick tongues. And though she lived an hour away, word traveled. "I told you," she said, her voice laced with a bitterness she'd carried for decades. "That man was never faithful. You think you're special? He lied to me too." "Mom, please," I whispered. "Not now. "You're fighting ghosts, Elizabeth," she said. "He's gone. No court ruling will make up for what he did." Her words stung because they were true. But pride is a stubborn thing. Once it starts burning, it doesn't die easily. "I'm not fighting him," I said. "I'm fighting for me," she sighed. "Just make sure you know the difference." Then she hung up. I sat on my couch, staring at the blank TV screen, her voice echoing in my mind. Know the difference. Weeks passed. The case dragged on. I started seeing the world differently. Small things reminded me of the fracture beneath everything. A father pushing a stroller at the park. A girl calling out "Daddy" at a grocery store. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was something colder, like standing outside a warm house and realizing you never had the key. The trial finally concluded with the judge's decision to uphold the revised will. Half of everything, property, savings, bonds, would go to Elena. The words blurred as I read them. Half. Just like that. My father's double life became law. Afterward, I stood in the courthouse hallway, clutching the envelope like it might dissolve. Elena approached me again, hesitant. "I didn't want to take from you," she said softly. "I just wanted to know where I came from." I didn't reply, but when she added, "I wish he'd told us both the truth," something broke quietly inside me. Because she was right. We were both cheated. Not of money, but of honesty. That night I sat at my kitchen table. The legal papers spread before me, untouched. The house felt emptier than ever. I realized that what I wanted wasn't the inheritance. It was acknowledgement, proof that I hadn't been just half of his life story, and maybe, just maybe, that's what she wanted too. For a while, I disappeared. Not in the dramatic sense. No plane tickets, no mountain retreat, no new city. I just withdrew from the noise, from people, from the constant reminder that my father had been someone I didn't fully know. I started working from home more. Skipping calls from friends. My lawyer emailed about paperwork. I left it unread for days. I just didn't have the strength. But silence, when it stretches long enough, becomes its own kind of mirror. And in that silence, I saw myself too clearly. I was angry, but not just at him. I was angry at the child I used to be, the one who believed that love meant ownership, that being the only one made me special. The truth is, I didn't want to share him, even in memory. I didn't want to share the grief, the guilt, or the bloodline. But grief doesn't care about ownership. It grows wild, spreading roots wherever it can. A month after the verdict, I got a call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a small, careful voice. "Hi, Liz, it's Elena." I closed my eyes. "How did you get my number?" "The lawyer," she said quickly. "I hope that's okay. I wanted to ask if you'd meet me. One last time." My first instinct was to say no, to protect the fragile peace I'd built around my anger. But curiosity has always been my undoing. "Why?" I asked. "Because there's something you should see." We met at a small park by the waterfront, the kind my father used to take me to when I was little. It was early evening, the sun hanging low over the bay, the air carrying that faint metallic scent of salt and diesel from nearby boats. Elena was already there, sitting on a bench. She looked tired, like someone who'd been rehearsing this moment for days. She held a small box in her lap. "I found this," she said quietly, "in one of my mom's old trunks. It's from him." She opened it carefully, like it might break if handled too fast. Inside were 2 identical silver pendants, small oval lockets with engraved initials. One had EA for Elena Alvarez. The other, LP mine I froze. "He gave these to her," Elena said. "She said he bought 2. One for me, one for you, but he never sent yours." I reached out, my fingers grazing the cool metal. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph of him, smiling faintly, Like he always did in pictures. My throat tightened. "Why are you giving this to me?" I whispered. "Because I think he meant for you to have it," she said. "And because I don't want this to be the only thing left between us." The last word, us, hung in the air like an offering. I didn't know what to do with it. I wanted to be angry again, to push her away, to protect the story I'd been telling myself, that I was the victim and she was the thief. But in that moment, I couldn't, because she looked as lost as I felt. We sat there for a while, saying nothing. The sky turned amber, the light catching on the waves. After a long silence, I said softly, "Did you love him?" She looked at me, startled. "Of course. He was my dad," her voice cracked. "He used to write me letters when he was away. Little things, about the weather, about the places he was working. Sometimes he sent postcards with pictures of mountains or bridges he helped design." I nodded slowly. "He used to send me blueprints, for fun. Said I'd be an engineer one day." We both laughed. A strange, hollow laugh that felt more like a sigh. Two girls who'd grown up waiting for the same man to come home. After that night, something shifted. We didn't become friends, not right away, but we stopped being enemies. We exchanged emails, then occasional texts. She told me about her job at a small publishing firm. I told her about my architecture projects. It was small talk, but it was a start. And in the quiet way that forgiveness sometimes creeps in, I began to understand something. Maybe inheritance isn't just about what's written on paper. Maybe it's about the stories we choose to keep and the ones we choose to rewrite. Still, I had to face my mother. She'd been furious when she learned I'd met Elena again. "Why would you give her the time of day?" she demanded over the phone. "After what he did to us?" "Because she didn't do it, Mom," I said. "He did." My mother's silence on the line was long and sharp. "You always make excuses for him," she finally said. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done carrying his mistakes like they're mine." For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on my own side. That night, I opened the locket again. The photograph inside was grainy, slightly faded, but his eyes, they were still the same. Warm, tired, human. I realized then that maybe forgiveness wasn't for him at all. It was for me, for the version of myself that had been stuck in that courtroom, clutching anger like it was proof of loyalty. So I made a decision. I called my lawyer the next morning and told him to close the case, withdraw any pending appeals. "It's done," I said. "Let it rest." He sounded surprised. "Are you sure, Liz? You could still—" "I'm sure," I interrupted. "I don't want to win anymore. I just want to move on." A few months later, I flew to Manila. It wasn't planned. Elena had mentioned she was visiting her mother, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I said I'd join. When I landed, the air was heavy with heat and jasmine. The city moved in colors, tricycles buzzing, children laughing in the streets, the smell of grilled corn mixing with rain on asphalt. We visited the old neighborhood where her mother still lived. The woman greeted me with cautious kindness, her eyes studying me as though she was looking for him in my face. "He spoke of you often," she said softly. He was proud of both his girls. Both. That word didn't sting anymore. It just settled. We spent the evening sharing stories. Some overlapped. Details of trips, his odd little habits, the way he hummed when he worked. For the first time, the pieces began to fit together. Not perfectly, but enough to make a whole. When I returned home, I visited my father's grave. The grass had grown thick around the stone, and someone, maybe my mother, had left fresh flowers. I knelt, brushing away the dirt from his name. "You were a coward," I said quietly. "But you were also human, and I guess so am I." I stayed there a while, watching the leaves move in the breeze. thinking about all the versions of love we never talk about, the flawed, fractured ones that still count, even when they shouldn't. When I stood up to leave, I whispered, "I forgive you." And for the first time since his death, I meant it. That night, I got an email from Elena. Subject: something Dad would have wanted inside was a scanned copy of a drawing, 2 small houses side by side, sketched in pencil. Underneath, in my father's handwriting, for my girls. 2 homes, 1 sky. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not what we're given, but what we choose to make peace with. Forgiveness sounds beautiful when you say it out loud, but living it? That's the real work. Even after the trip, the quiet moments still had ghosts. I'd find myself setting 2 plates instead of 1, or reaching for my phone on Sundays out of old habit. I'd scroll through contacts, see Dad still sitting there, the number disconnected but still holding weight. There's something strange about forgiving the dead. They can't hear you, they can't answer back, but somehow the silence feels different after. Softer. I began writing letters I never sent. Each one started with "Dear Dad" and ended with something like, "I'm okay now." Some nights I'd burn them in the sink, not out of anger, but as a way of releasing what I couldn't keep anymore. When the inheritance was finally processed, I received my share, smaller than I'd imagined, but somehow it didn't matter. Elena called to tell me she was planning to use her portion to open a small book cafe in Toronto. "I'll name it after him," she said. "Not to glorify him, but to remember. Maybe to make something good out of what was broken." I smiled at the thought. "Then you should know," I said. "He always wanted to open a cafe someday. Said he'd serve coffee so strong it could wake the dead." She laughed, a sound that surprised me with how familiar it felt. "Then it's settled," she said. "I'll call it Awake." News of the inheritance dispute eventually reached my mother's circle. Neighbors, distant relatives, even her church group. And people talk, especially when they don't understand. Some said I'd been greedy. Others whispered that I'd fought my sister for money. I used to care about things like that, about what people thought, but not anymore. The truth is, when you spend long enough drowning in bitterness, you stop fearing judgment. You start craving peace. One Sunday, I went to visit my mother. She was in the garden, trimming her roses, her movements brisk, sharp. "You look thinner," she said, not looking up. "Are you eating?" "I'm fine, Mom." She clipped another branch. "I heard you went to the Philippines." I nodded. "I did." She finally looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "And? Did you find what you were looking for?" I hesitated. "No," I said quietly. "But I found what I needed." Her hand slowed. For a moment she looked like she might cry, but instead she said, "He broke us, Liz. I just don't want him to break you too." I smiled gently. "He's not going to. Because I'm done letting him." For the first time in years, she didn't argue. She just nodded, set down her shears, and said, "Good." That night, I started sketching again. Before all of this, I'd stopped designing for pleasure. Every line had been about contracts, deadlines, precision. But now I drew something else. Something simpler. A house with 2 wings, one painted warm, one cool, connected by a shared courtyard. 2 homes under one roof. I titled it Inheritance. A month later, I got an invitation in the mail. A grand opening. Awake. Books and Brew Cafe, founded by Elena Alvarez and Elizabeth Parker. I laughed when I saw it. I hadn't agreed to be listed as co-founder, but that was Elena, always finding ways to bridge gaps I didn't know I still had, so I flew to Toronto. Again. The cafe was small but beautiful. Warm light, brick walls, and the faint scent of roasted beans and paper. On one side there was a mural, a watercolor of a sky splitting into dawn. 2 homes beneath it, and in small cursive letters beneath, 2 homes, 1 sky. When I saw it, my throat closed. Do you like it? Elena asked from behind me. I turned to her, eyes wet. It's perfect. She smiled, and for the first time, I saw not the stranger from the lawyer's office, but my father's daughter, my sister. We sat together after the crowd thinned, the soft hum of conversation still floating through the room. You know, she said, I think he wanted us to meet. Maybe not like this, but eventually I nodded slowly. Maybe some truths are just too heavy to tell while you're alive. She tilted her head. You think he was ashamed? I thought about it. Maybe. But maybe he just didn't know how to be two things at once. We both fell silent, watching the streetlights blink on outside. Then she said something I'll never forget. Maybe that's why we exist, to finish what our parents couldn't. Over the next few months, our lives intertwined naturally. Calls became routine. Holidays started to overlap. When my birthday came, Elena sent me a framed photograph of the two of us standing outside a wake, holding coffee cups and laughing. Beneath it, she'd written, "Legacy is not what we inherit, but what we choose to build together." I placed it on my father's old desk, the one I'd kept all this time, the same desk where I'd once found the letter that broke me open. Now it held something else, something that healed. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't fought back. If I'd just accepted the truth quietly, like people expected. But then I realize the fight wasn't about money or fairness. It was about identity. It was about reclaiming my own story after realizing someone else had been writing parts of it behind my back. And maybe that's what forgiveness is, not erasing the past, but choosing to hold it differently. I still visit my father's grave every now and then. I bring coffee, 2 cups, one for him, one for me. Sometimes I talk, sometimes I just sit. And on windy days I swear I can almost hear him. That faint hum he used to make when he worked. The sound of a man trying to fix things too late. I tell him about the cafe, about Mom, about how Elena's doing well, about how I'm doing better, and I tell him the truth he never got to hear. I was angry, Dad, but I'm okay now. You made a mess, but we made something out of it. When I leave, I always look back once, at the stone, the trees, the quiet, and I whisper, "Rest now. We've got it from here." That was the day I realized something simple, something I think we all forget. Family isn't defined by who we share blood with. It's defined by who we choose to heal with. I used to think the worst thing a parent could do was leave. Now I know, it's never telling you why. In the months after the cafe opening, life started to feel like mine again. Not the old version built on routine and denial, but something quieter, more deliberate. I moved to a smaller apartment, a corner unit with morning light that spilled across the kitchen tiles. I started waking up early, making real breakfasts instead of instant coffee and stale toast. It's funny how healing shows up in small habits, how peace doesn't arrive in grand gestures, but in the way your hands stop shaking when you fold laundry, or how you can finally listen to a song without skipping the verse that hurts too much. One evening, I was sketching at my desk when a notification pinged, an email from Elena. The subject line read, "For you." I opened it, and there was a photograph. It was a picture of her and her mom, standing in front of a newly painted house, their arms around each other. The caption said, "We're finally home," and beneath it, a short note. "I wanted you to see this first. We used the last of Dad's savings to fix it. It's not perfect, but it's ours. I think you'd like the kitchen. It's got those big windows you always talk about." I smiled, reading it twice. Attached below was another photo, the view from their kitchen window, showing a streak of sunset burning across the sky. One sky, 2 homes. I thought about how far we'd come from that first day at the lawyer's office, 2 strangers bound by betrayal, and how grief, when faced head-on, can turn into understanding if you let it. The world didn't suddenly become softer. There were still reminders, birthdays without calls, anniversaries that reopened wounds. But those moments didn't crush me anymore. They passed through me, like waves. I started volunteering once a week at a local community center, helping underprivileged kids with art and design. One of them, a quiet boy named Noah, liked to build tiny houses out of scrap cardboard. One day, he asked me, "Do you think houses can be sad?" I smiled. "No," I said, "but I think people can. And sometimes houses remember." He looked up. "So you fix them?" "Something like that," I said. "I helped them become homes again." That night, his question stayed with me. "Do you think houses can be sad?" I realized maybe that's what I'd been doing all along, trying to repair the house inside me. The one my father's choices had left in ruins, and little by little, I was rebuilding it. A few months later, I received an invitation from Elena again. This time, it wasn't about business. It was personal. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, and she wanted me to visit, not as a guest, but as family. I hesitated. I'd never met the woman properly beyond that first, tentative visit. But something told me this was important. When I arrived, she greeted me with that same gentle politeness I remembered. Her movements were slower now, her voice quieter, but her eyes, kind, observant, were the same. We had tea in her living room, surrounded by photographs of Elena growing up. Some of them included my father. He looked younger, freer. "I used to hate him for leaving," she said suddenly. "But I think now, maybe he just didn't know how to stay." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, because sometimes silence says everything. Before I left, she held my hand and whispered, "You remind me of him, but in all the ways I wish he'd been brave enough to be." That stayed with me. A year later, Awake Cafe became more than just a business. It became a place people came to write, to remember, to heal. Elena started hosting open mic nights, where people read letters to those they'd lost, unsent, unspoken, unfinished. She called it Echo Evenings. She asked if I'd write one too. I wasn't sure I could. But one night I did, and when it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the microphone, my palms sweating, my heart steady. The lights were low, the room quiet. I took a breath and said, "This one's for my father." Then I read, "You taught me how to measure things, angles, pressure, weight, but not how to measure love. You built bridges for a living, but the one between us never stood long enough. Still, I've learned that love doesn't vanish when truth arrives. It just changes shape. And maybe that's enough." When I finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. That deep, respectful kind of silence that feels like understanding. Then people clapped. Softly. Elena was in the front row, smiling through tears, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the story. The next morning, I went for a walk by the lake. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, the kind of clean that feels like a restart. I thought about how this journey had started, in a lawyer's office, with a stranger's face and a will that tore open my world, and how it had ended, not with victory, but with connection. Sometimes I wonder if my father knew this would happen. If, somewhere in his fractured heart, he hoped we'd find each other one day. Maybe that's why he wrote 2 homes, 1 sky. Maybe it wasn't just a sketch. Maybe it was a wish. A few weeks later, I took the old photos, the ones I'd once hated looking at, and placed them into a new album. No labels, no order, just fragments of a life side by side, one of him holding me, one of him holding her, both smiling, different places, same man, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to choose which version was real, because maybe both were. It's been 3 years since the inheritance case ended. The world has moved on, and so have we. Elena and I still talk every week. My mother and I still argue about roses and rain. And my father, well, I think he's at peace now. I know I am. These days, when people ask me what I do, I tell them, I help build homes. But what I really mean is, I help people find their footing again, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Family can shatter you, but it can also teach you how to rebuild. You just have to decide which pieces to keep.